Hey guys, it's Mathel here once again with another wrap up of an entire league's build worth of videos and stuff. I usually dread these things and this one is no exception. There's a lot of builds to go over, as you may see from the past league, Affliction League. I ended up doing 17 builds, I think it was, and that is with a month-long break going through like last epoch as well. So if I actually just committed and made builds in this league all the way through, I'd probably be at something like 25 builds, because there were a lot of gems to go through, there was a lot of transfigured action, and I could non-stop just make more and more builds. So I'll try and keep this one brief because Affliction is a bit special in that it had some fairly game-changing mechanics from the league mechanic that aren't being carried over to the future. So most of these builds you're gonna have to take with a bit of a grain of salt because there's a good chance you can't replicate it, at least not the exact way it was built, but I'll try and just go over them and talk more about the build style and the skill itself and how good it was, etc. And I'm also going to try and just change the sort of budget of the rating a bit more to how realistic is the gear, because Affliction was also a league that had huge amounts of gear in the league, and you know, economy was all over the place, and lots of really powerful items were much more accessible than ever before, and a lot of these builds utilized that shit, but it was still relatively cheap for my own standards. So yeah, we'll just get right into it. So the first build that I went with was actually a bit of a question mark. I had no idea what I was really going to start at the start of the league, so I just went with like some poison or toxic rain style pathfinder and then see where it took me. Ended up taking me to the new Scourge arrow, which shot out more pods, more arrows, instead of like just a channel sort of thing, and it became a pretty fluid playstyle, and it used the poison tincture that let all your damage poison. So this type of build is still very much doable just with you know, pure chaos or pure fizz and then into chaos, but overall it was a very strong character, very nice starter. Once again, could be startable, I'm pretty sure, and it utilized storm rain totems to sort of do extra single target, because you could just shit out a lot of extra beams with the new Storm Rain Transfigure, and then stacked a lot of poisons that way. The only problem was if things moved around a lot, it was a little bit annoying stacking up poison against those enemies. So like a good example would be this boss fight, and yep, stack up lots of poison, things move, things take less damage because of that. This character was a starter, it was very cheap, and it ended up taking on some uber bosses. Like I went all the way through my atlas and did plenty of ubers on it, and still, yeah, I'd say this type of playstyle, this type of character should still be pretty strong, fairly fun, and completely doable. So with that, if we then give it a bit of a rating, effectiveness, probably an 8. It took on most of the game and comfortably something, did things, you know, it went through everything it needed to as a starter, pretty damn good, but you know, the single target was a bit weird with how things moved around. The enjoyment of it, also about an 8, you know, it was nothing too crazy of a build, so it was just a nice stable starter, but it was fun having the new Scourge arrow and trying stuff out, and being a pathfinder with lots of flask sustain. And then realistic gear, it was pretty damn realistic, so I think that could also be something like an 8. It's just the, you know, the tincture is going to be a bit weird because you will have to stick to a strict type of damage. It's going to either be chaos and chaos mostly, or fizz into some chaos, that sort of thing, or some flat chaos stacking. So it's a pretty solid build, but nothing too insane. Next was a build that was highly experimental and seemed like it had lots of potential, but really did fizzle out after getting to like higher tiers and end game and stuff. It was on a new transfigured gem. It's the Blade Blast of Dagger blasting or some shit. It scales off of your dagger. It starts out real strong because it's got very good early game scaling, right from like, you know, level 1 with the right daggers, but then it just does not really keep scaling too well. I tried to do this as kind of a meme thing with a Mjolnir, so I was cycloning, proccing both of the Dagger, Blade Blast, and a Wave of Conviction from Mjolnir, and it didn't really go the distance. I don't feel it was worth playing. I don't feel the skill had enough in it. I think it needs probably a little bit more number juicing to be, you know, properly good or viable. Maybe there's better examples of the Dagger Blade Blast out there, but my own example, my own test, kind of concluded that it just doesn't have enough and didn't seem good enough. So overall, the character's still playable. I still got it to, like, you know, high enough tiers, still did some Guardians and shit. But that I think we could make work for pretty much anything. So, you know, with some gear and all that, pretty much anything can get this far. But then it, yeah, really fizzled out and definitely wasn't going to be taking on any super large content like Ubers. So that one I could probably give some fairly weak ratings. Unfortunately, the effectiveness, it cleared okay. It did some bossing, but, you know, it wasn't anything really good. The enjoyment of it was really fun to start with, and then also fun to try and figure out and scale. But then it became just kind of a mediocre Cyclone cast on crit. And then the realistic gear, it wasn't super hard to gear or anything. But to get to really good stages, it definitely need more gear. I don't know, something like a 7. Some pretty, you know, not good ratings, I'd say, is what it deserves. But still, you know, nothing too bad, because it did do things and it was still a character. I still got it to like 93 or 94 or something. So yeah, that gives us a total of 18. Next up was a hugely meme character, and I don't know if you can tell what the fuck's going on. It is the surfboard Rage Vortex of Berserking, I think it's called, and Cleave of Rage or some shit. Just huge amounts of area scaling of both the Cleave and the Rage Vortex, and you know, with the Surfboard MTX meant that we were just going for a ride, mowing down enemies in our path. It was a lot of fun to play, and it was decently effective. Like, you could have done more to make it more effective. You don't necessarily have to do much Cleave in this sort of action. It was much more about the Rage Vortex and scaling that with maximum amounts of rage. So I think Berserker had something like 120 rage or some shit. And yeah, there's probably better examples of this type of rage vortex, maybe with some Void Forge or some shit. But you can see that with some charm slots, I think it was, that gave us a lot of area as well. You can really take this area to some pretty crazy extremes. So yeah, this is the melee gameplay that everyone dreams of. You know, when they say fix melee or some shit, they want all of their melee skills to be doing this, you know, off-screening, on-screening, and just destroying everything in one hit. And it's probably still fairly doable, but yeah, you'd have to do some other area scaling or some shit. Otherwise, yeah, just maybe Ralakesh style boots and all kinds of crazy stuff. Just a huge example of some melee. And I do think that you can do much bigger with this type of skill. Like I said, some Void Forge or something. And not going full maximum rage. Maximum rage was kind of a meme. It really wasn't super necessary to get that far in. The only real downside was you do degen rage, and then having to swap to your weapon swap to kind of keep your rage up sometimes just felt a bit, you know, uncomfortable at times. So there is that. But pretty good stuff all around. The effectiveness, it cleared like a beast. It was very fun with that type of clear. And then the single target was kind of whatever. You know, we could do some bosses, we could do some decent stuff, but nothing crazy. The enjoyment has to be a 10. It was hugely fun to do. And the realistic gear was probably something like a 7. It does take some pretty good gear, you know, to really feel good on this type of a thing. And then the bigger versions are going to take even more. And then, yeah, we'd call that something like a 25. And then did the new Spectral Shield Throw, which kind of reminded me that Spectral Shield Throw is still pretty damn fun, very good, and aesthetically pleasing as well. As you can see, it, you know, with the right MTX, the Sunrise Shield, I think it is, you can throw around these frisbees and just, they go ham. They are just bouncing everywhere. They're chaining and stuff, and it feels pretty damn good. As a Trickster as well, we could have some good defense, we could have some good offense, and a real nice sort of fast play style. The big problem was this is the new Spectral Shield Throw transfigured version. It was flat, cold scaling, and typically Shield Throw is fizz into a conversion of some kind, and this one really just kind of ran out of scaling as well. It doesn't seem like there's enough damage behind the flat cold scaling. If you did the fizz into an LE conversion, you'd end up having a build that has like 3 to 5 times more damage, I think. So I was trying to basically force and trying to make a an uphill battle of a skill work, and it did work. It did, you know, perform well enough, but then knowing that I would have done much better off of a different setup, yeah, it makes you feel kind of bad. So Spectral Shield Throw is still very good if you've got the right budget with, you know, the Fizz conversion. I saw some very big examples out in PoE Ninja, so my character, I don't know, had a few million DPS. There was still like some 20 to 30 million ones out there. And yeah, still a very good skill and still very playable. This version though, and the new Spectral Shield Throw, I don't know if it's good enough. I think it's missing a bit of numbers once again. So I wouldn't be copying this, and I wouldn't be, well, maybe there's better ways of doing it. I don't know. I didn't see it, and it looks to me like the new Spectral Shield Throw transfigured version is not worth fucking around with. But I might be wrong. As always, take everything I say just within my own experience and my own channel, and who knows what else there is out there. So the effectiveness of it overall, it cleared real well. Its single target was pretty crap. Got to give it something like a 7. The enjoyment, Spectral Shield Throw, very fun to play. Yeah, we'd still probably do another version of this league if I did a Fizz convert or something. So it's pretty damn fun. The realistic gear, it was not very realistic. I think I did it as Eternity Shroud. Yeah, Eternity Shroud, which means it takes a fair bit of work to put everything together. Some of the gear pieces, you know, very easy. Some of them pretty damn hard. So it's got to be something fairly hard to put together. And that gives us a total of about 20. And I'll probably start looking at the actual gear for the rest of the characters just to make sure, you know. We then had an extremely big novelty of a character, one that, you know, wouldn't have been possible prior to this league, I don't think, and just some real weird shit, and that is huge life scaling. And I think I used, what was it, like Arc, Reap, and I also tried some Flame Blast as well. So the basis of the build is to get a lot of life, use the Sacrifice support gem and the new staff, and convert all of that sort of extra life or chaos from life-based as chaos, into Ignite thanks to the new jewel as well. I don't think this type of a build is possible anymore unless you go Elementalist. So, you know, if you want to try something like this, again, it'd have to be an Elementalist, and that might still be doable, but it was, I think, the biggest Ignites I've ever had by far, and also the first time I've ever really tried Vaal Arc as an Ignite source. And it is juicy. I do understand why people have done like Arc Ignites and Archmage sort of stuff in the past. It feels super good. So it's a pretty reliable way of getting big Ignites. The big problem is that it is life-based, and it was using Dissolution of Flesh, I think it is. As you can see, my life gets reserved when I get hit, and then you have to not get hit for a little bit, and then your life gets shoots back up to top. It is a very different playstyle and a very different type of build compared to almost everything else out there, and it takes some getting used to. Once I did though, it was playable, it was okay, and it was pretty powerful. It's just, it's very uncomfortable to have to build into, and very uncomfortable to have to, like, get used to. So I don't expect everyone's going to get there. It took me a while, and in the end it delivered, I think, the biggest Ignites I've ever had, you know, in modern times, and did clear a bunch of Ubers and stuff. Once again, it was just playstyle pending, so it took you a good bit of figuring out how to, like, avoid all kinds of bosses and shit, but it was well and truly, yep, Ubers and stuff. Big Ignite damage, and it even let me do Flame Blast, and Flame Blast felt similar on the Ignite scale to everything I did before that. This is the new Flame Blast as well, and it's just more uncomfortable because you have to stand there, channel, and then manage to hit your little bullseye pinpoint Flame Blast to actually get that big Ignite. So that's Uber Maven. We did a bunch of Ubers on this character, like a lot of Ubers, but it's just a weird one, and it is complicated. And then the gear, it's not impossible to replicate. It's just a bunch of high ES that gets converted into life, but that is no longer doable with the without the ascendancy that we had and used to scale this sort of stuff. And then, you know, with this stuff. I don't know if that's still in the game or anything. It's, yeah, this is just one for the Affliction League. But it was definitely very interesting and weird. Effectiveness, like I said, very good damage, but then it's like kind of weird when you can and can't get hit and stuff. It has to be something like an 8. Like it was insane overall, but then it has its problems, right? The enjoyment of it, it's tough to play, man. It's tough to enjoy a lot of the time, but then some of the big ignites and the arc was really satisfying, and yeah, could recommend some arc ignite in the future with, I don't know, Archmage or something. Realistic gear, it was pretty realistic, like it's just a bit hard to put together, but you know, it was fairly costly. And then going forward, it's just not doable, I don't think, the same way. Overall, yeah, it wasn't, you know, super expensive for the league that it was in. And then, yeah, that gives us a total of 21, I think. Next up was one of my favorites and a crowd pleaser, the double stack of momentum, the flail build. Just flailing all over the place with pretty close to maximum attack speed. I went for about as maximum as you can get for a budget character as a raider, but you could obviously get bigger attack speed if you like a berserker with blitz charges, shit like that. It is the new double strike. It does scale off of quality, I think, and give you increase it more attack speed per stack of momentum. So you start attacking, you get these stacks of momentum that there's 10 of at the top of the bar. Once you're at 10, you've got like 200% more attack speed, some shit like that. And it was super satisfying. It's like it's a ramp based character, so you know, you do have to attack for a little bit, you do have to get your charges up, you have to get your rage up, but once you're ramped, you are just going ham, you are flailing, and with some life gain on hit, you can face tank just about everything in the game. You know, that doesn't one-shot you. So with some life gain on hit, that was huge amounts of sustain, and we're also just a zappy, fast character, extra strikes, you know, melee splash, full cold based with Herald of Ice, just created some fun gameplay as well. This one, yeah, was just one of the nicest melees I'd played in a good while, because it was well-rounded, it was pretty easy to build, and then it was just super satisfying to actually pilot in the end, and also the memes of just flail. Right, super fun times. It did have a tincture, which is no longer going to be accessible. You know, a few little things from Affliction, but hopefully there's some extra things in the next league that also make this better. And this one wasn't a particularly expensive character to put together, I don't think. So you could do better if you tried in different ways, I think. Dual claws, bunch of damage. Dialas to get all the extra quality on double strike, which doesn't necessarily have to happen. They can do it another way. I think, yeah, maybe a good Perseverance champion or a good Berserker, Blitz, that sort of stuff could give you even more memes. But overall, nothing crazy on the gear. Once again, pretty realistic. And I used Ralikesh, but I didn't really heavily abuse him in this character. They were just a decent use, not a full abuse case. But they do still exist, and you can still abuse them once again. So this one, effectiveness, didn't have the biggest single target, but I mean, it killed everything, and it did everything real nice. It map cleared well, it single targeted well, it let me face tank and stuff. I mean, I think we have to call it about a 10. Yeah, probably. The enjoyment, a 10. And the realistic gear, it's got some stuff. It's not super hard to put together. It's a little bit expensive here or there, but can be done, and can be done in bigger versions. So pretty high score. It's one of my favorite builds of the league. I don't know if I'd call it build of the league or anything, but one of my favorites. After that, apologies, you won't be able to see much on this character. It is Ele Hit Bow. So it's been a while since I've done some Ele Hit, and I hadn't done a bow version maybe ever. So I was taking this one with some kind of caution, and I had to try and build into huge amounts of DPS to make sure that it was going to work, because I wasn't sure it was going to do some good damage. No one plays Bow Ele Hit anymore. I'd never done it, so I had to like approach it with a maximum DPS kind of mindset, and that resulted in a pretty squishy type of character. A glass cannon is what you'd call it, but it had absolutely insane DPS in the end, because, you know, it's still Ele Hit, and with the right budget, it can do insane things. I thought I needed to make sure it was going to do big damage, and turns out I kind of went over the top. And you can definitely build more into defense, and you can definitely make a good, viable Ele Hit as a bow character. with, yeah, what ends up being a completely silly visual effect with the Sniper's Mark. So, I mean, maybe that won't be a thing anymore because Sniper's Mark gets a slight nerf, but it's still going to be crazy. I think this is still well and truly doable. As you can see, kinda silly action on the Ele Hit front. The character itself, it tried to utilize a whole bunch of Abyssal Jewels to get penetration, and yeah, it had some fine-tuned gear here or there, you know, some of the Abyssal crap. Nothing too out of touch, but it's not the smallest budget. And like I said, I think you can do better with like defenses in a build like this, because we were pretty glass cannon. It's a very kill or be killed sort of situation. Yeah, good proof of concept for Ele Hit bows for the future, I think. So the effectiveness, it was, I don't know, given that a stiff breeze could have killed us, you know, that has to be a bit lower, but otherwise it blasted through the game comfortably. It did Ubers and everything like that. The enjoyment, I didn't particularly enjoy the retina damage that it gave me, but other than that, bow character, very fast, very strong, very zoom, very enjoyable. And then the gear, I wouldn't say it's particularly realistic. It's, you know, kind of hard to attain. It's nothing too crazy, but it's definitely not something you're going to be getting very easily. So something like a 5. And that gives us a total of 23. The next character was more of an example of proper Ralakesh boot abuse, and it was the new Cold Snap Transfigured Gem, Cold Snap of Power. It was some of the craziest single target I think I've ever had, some of the hardest a character has ever hit, and a good part of that is because Cold Snap is a pretty strong gem, the new Transfigured one, and the Ralakesh boots are highly abusable, the way you can scale charges and the various things you can do with them, with power charges, with Inner Conviction, I think it was called, with, you know, endurance, triple damage charges. This is a pretty large boot abuse case, and it resulted in a very snappy character, like very fast, very clean, big freezes, big damage, and yeah, there's probably more you could do for it defensively. I think I remember it being a bit on the squishier end. I mean, almost 4k life, right? But then it's got like a bunch of endurance charges and fizz damage reduction, and we freeze things and we kill things very quick. But, you know, if you want, you could make it more defensive, because I think we ended up having something like 100 million DPS, which is pretty ridiculous. Took on a bunch of Ubers. I think that first clip was from Uber Maven. Yeah, it felt kind of cheese with the boot abuse. Most replayed over here. What does it say? It's when I blew up Cirrus, apparently. Did he just land? He did not. Just where we got a flask, right? Sick. But yeah, nah, like, all of that's still pretty good. You can definitely do a cold snap once again. And the boots did not really get nerfed except for some cast speed, move speed. And I think for the most part, we just blinked around on this character, so it doesn't really matter. Frost blinked? Yeah, Frost blinked around or some shit. Where is it? Arcane Surge. It would have been here. Frost blink over there. So yeah, it's still a very doable character, still a very doable like skill, build, all that type of shit. But I think you can do different ones. Doesn't have to be this type of a thing. I have heard plenty of success of Cold Snap of Power on different ascendancies, different ways of building. So take it for what it's worth. Cold Snap of Power, pretty damn good. Effectiveness, it farmed very well, it ubered very well. I did lots of Sanctums on it. It's a good skill for Sanctum as well. The enjoyment, pretty damn high. Having to manage charges a bit here or there was a bit uncomfortable, and, you know, some sort of squishiness. Realistic, yeah, it's kind of realistic, but then it's also kind of hard, because these in particular are probably going to be easy enough to get once again, once Valdo's maps are starting to get farmed, but until that point, it's really hard to get good precursors. The rest, kind of whatever, kind of easy to get, so I think we call it something like a 5 again, just because there's some good, some bad, and I think I also used Forbidden Flesh Jewels on this one, so something like a 24. I then did a bow cast on crit, which I love doing, usually a very strong sort of archetype of a character, and I wanted to do Voltaxic once again, and I wanted to go maximum shock chance with the new arc, I think it was, and the new Crackling Lance. Crackling Lance Lightning Conduit, that's right, the new Lightning Conduit and the new Crackling Lance. So the new Crackling Lance would just throw out lasers and just a pure beam, so you could actually scale it well. It doesn't have to do stacks of intensify. Instead, it just, shoots out a good thick laser beam. With rain of arrows, we're teleporting around everywhere, but the end result is that we are trying to have bigger single target with these laser beams. And I was also using lightning arrow. I was testing this character with lightning arrow, I think the new one that like sticks in and does pulses. I was testing that for cast on crit. I was testing, all kinds of shit, and it ended up being an okay character. It was a bit squish once again, because like that's kind of how the Voltaxic cast on crit is, and it did okay damage from memory. It could kill Ubers, it could do stuff like that, but it was a bit tough, I think. I expected more from it, I think, was the end result. I wanted slightly more damage for what we put into it, given, the amount of shock, the amount of damage we tried to put in. It still did really good damage, but then it was a bit uncomfortable with some RF and stuff. As you can see, still farming Ubers, still putting out big shocks. It's just that sometimes these shocks, I believe, were kind of unreliable, and you weren't sure if you were getting a 140 shock or less or more, etc. Yeah, kind of a doable character once again, and maybe different examples of the new Crackling Lance could be better, but it was, I don't know. I don't remember being fully happy with the overall performance of it. Maybe because you weren't freezing anything, and then you were a bit squishier because of that, or because I just expected more. I don't really remember. But yeah, the new Crackling Lance definitely works, and can be done with many things. I'd say it was more because I wasn't fully sure what I was doing with the character, like Blast Rain, Storm Rain, Lightning Arrow, Rain of Arrows. I was testing a lot of those things and never really figured out all that I was doing. So I think that's what led me to be a bit questionable on it. Effectiveness, cleared great, bossed pretty well, kind of squished though. Enjoyment, I'd say I expected a bit more enjoyment out of it, so it's got to be something like a 7, sometimes dying to squishiness, and not the biggest overall playstyle for one of these Voltaxic CoCs, but it did pretty well, I'd say. And then realistic gear, most of it's pretty realistic. I don't think it was too hard, and ashes. Otherwise, nothing crazy. Voltaxic, some extra stuff, just some pretty normal endgame gear. So realistic enough. Something like an 8, and then that gives us a total of 16 plus 7, 23. The next build was a very strong one in the end, and also an absolute mess. So yeah, we started out with a death to a Valdo map, I believe. Just showing you how crazy things can get, but it is the Volcanic Fissure of Snaking. I was aware that it was going to be pretty good. Everyone hyped it up to some level. I didn't really know it was going to be this quite good. So I played Volcanic Fissure before, and it's a very good melee skill. But this example was the snaking one, which bounces all over the screen kinda, and can double hit bosses sometimes, and yeah, has high amounts of effectiveness for clear, for single target, for comfort. A very comfortable melee skill in the end, because basically it homes, so you can click kind of wherever you want. You can be at high amounts of range, you can get good life gain on hit and recovery from it. You can get real good clear in maps, and it scales pretty well. It's got like some good scaling behind it, so it'll end up being a pretty good, just on the budget to the high end. This one wasn't super high end, didn't do anything crazy for scaling. This one was an int stack off of a synthesized scepter, so I tried to go full memes with it as well, and also a Golem Mentalist, which I don't think is super ideal because it stretches you in many different ways, and I went CI. So it was a real hipster style character, but it was an absolute beast. I think it did, cleared Ubers, 30 wave Simulacrum, and then by the end of it, I was like, we got to try and do some Valdos and shit, just because what else can we do? It was just that freaking good. So highly recommend the new Volcanic Fissure. Strength stack versions, Brutus Lead Sprinkler, that sort of thing will get you going a lot easier than something like this. But yeah, there's going to be a lot of things you can do with this skill. I think it's pretty versatile. The gear for this one was not particularly hard to do, except for maybe the Scepter, because getting one of these is, hard. And then also Megalomaniacs, I think, were pretty hard. But yeah, I wouldn't expect too many people to try and copy this thing, because it's a weird and tough one to build, and there's going to be much easier ways to do it, namely probably the strength stack. So this one, the effectiveness was a 10, insanely good. The only real problem is it's a golem, style character, and throughout the real high maps and, well, the real high Ubers and stuff like that, golems die. Simulacrum, golems die, and then you are vulnerable when they're dead. So that's its main point of non-effectiveness. The enjoyment, pretty damn high. Yeah, I think, maybe some crunchiness to it or something would make it a bit more fun, but otherwise, hugely fun skill for a melee ability. And then the realistic gear, I mean, mostly, but not entirely. It's nothing super crazy, but pretty hard to replicate. I'd call it something like a 7. And, a good strength stack version would have probably blown this one out of the water, but would have been maybe a bit more meta and maybe a bit more costly to put together because you're wearing the shit that everyone else wants to wear. The next build gave us an absolutely lovely piece of AI art in Cats on Crit Soulrend, and quite a bit bigger of a build than I ever would have anticipated. It, I think, used the new Soulrend, and it's a cast on crit with Lancing Steel Assassin, and it was a poison base as well. I tried to force an assassin for a character for once because, it's a pretty overlooked ascendancy and for good reason. And then I wanted to try out the new Soulrend, and with the Cat MTX, some glory definitely happened. This character actually was a surprise package because it ended up doing much better than I ever thought it would, and was one of the strongest characters I played for the league. Huge amount of poison damage. I don't think I'd ever had poison damage as high as this character, and it cleared Ubers, it cleared all maps and everything, and was very fun to play. So this is just an example of the Soulrends in Ultimatum with slow approach speed, just to give a real example of the amount of Soulrends you are shitting out there. But otherwise, yeah, very fast character to clear with, like really good single target as well. Just ramp based, so it takes a while to get going, but it's an absolute glorious mess on your screen. Pretty reliable for survivability as well, with like the life gain on hit you'd have. But yeah, just really surprising that an assassin could be this good in the current metas. So maybe you could do better with a non-assassin because it is a weak ascendancy, but I don't exactly remember the intricacies. I just know that this one went to 95, 96, something like that, like blasted maps, and then also did some pretty good single target. It was a lot of fun to play. And yeah, maybe I should do another one of these again. Just watching it now again, I'm just like, fuck. I do want to do a bunch of Cats on Crit again. So yeah, that one's probably worth watching, checking out again. I think it's the first time I ever used Covenant in a build. Like, I've always kind of avoided it because it was pretty good and, meta. Other than that, some weird gearing. So, some poison. I was trying to make sure the Lancing Steel was doing damage, poison damage as well, but it is almost entirely, I think, the Soulrend that's doing the damage. And then it was, difficult to figure out what I was doing with the Soulrends and the scaling. You'd probably have to watch the fucking video to, understand exactly the journey that this character took. It doesn't look like it's anything too crazy though, gear-wise. Maybe just a bit tougher without charms, I assume I used on this one. Something that could be done again, most likely. So effectiveness, pretty damn 10. Enjoyment, pretty damn 10. Realistic, yeah, honestly, does not look hard, does it? Something like an 8. A little bit of work to put into it, but nothing super unrealistic. The next one, I don't particularly remember how to feel about it. I think I was not super happy with it, but more because of its defense than its offense. It was a Gladiator, but an attempt at a Gladiator that isn't bleed. So it was like an attack base that scaled off of block and perseverance. So I went deep with the armor evasion theme, and then also with block and spell block. And like for the amount that I invested into trying to be defensive, I think I was still feeling a bit ambivalent about the defenses. It was also Flicker Strike, so you know, people always tell me to do Flicker Strike, but then I usually feel bad playing it, and then people feel bad watching it. So it's also got that going for it that, you know, was kind of a question mark. But it is Flicker Strike with Savior, and then I tried out a bunch of other skills to see what we could save, you know, from the build, because Flicker Strike obviously pretty difficult to love in the end game when we're talking like Ubers and shit. And in the end, I think I also tried Blade Storm and maybe some other shit. Let me see if there's anything else in the video here. Blade Storm was more for the single target. I think it still ended up killing a bunch of Ubers, but I never felt great about it because, like I said, I put a lot of work into being super thick, and then block just does not feel terrific to me at the moment because, yeah, I mean, you've got a lot of armor and evasion behind it. That was me limit testing how much I could tank. So you got a lot of armor and evasion behind it, but then still the block didn't feel super effective, and then the life pool isn't super high just because of how much I have to invest into everything else. And then the DPS wasn't terrific. Like, I tried to make sure I did big impale scaling and big defensiveness, and it's just better off, well, at least the way I could see it, it was just way better off focusing purely on offense and having like 3 to 4 times more damage. When, you know, I'm not infinitely tanky. So Perforate was the other thing I used, that's right. So overall, there's a bit of a question mark of a character. Like, its effectiveness, like for Flicker, it cleared well, but then the single target on those other things wasn't great. I'm going to call that something like a 6. The enjoyment of it, once again, I didn't really know how to feel about it. I didn't love it, and Savior was fun, and putting the character together was kind of fun, but then piloting it, nothing too huge. And then realistic gear, I think it was actually pretty tough, like kind of expensive. I mean, Savior, good gear, kind of. Lots of block, and then we also went with charms that had additional impale, so that's just straight up not doable anymore. Not the most expensive, but yeah, certainly not easy to put together. So realistic gear, not particularly. Give that like another 5 again, and that gives it a fairly well-deserved low score. The next was another bit of a surprise package, once again in a fairly unloved archetype and type of build, and that is Bleed Bow. And I did it as a Scion, because you can get like the Gladiator, you know, bleed stuff happening from the Scion Ascendancy, and also I believe this had charms where you could have Explode. Either charms or the jewel that could give you Bleed Explode, and thus you didn't need Gladiator at all for that sort of explode action. And it was a surprise just because it actually had some pretty fucking nuts single target damage for a bleed build. Of course, it is snipe based and puncture based, which, you know, pretty much always has to be the case at this stage, I think, for good bleed damage. But it did way more than I thought it would do, and that kind of playstyle with a decent enough base behind it, you know, you can take some hits and all that, just led to a real clean build. I did use the new split arrow by the looks of it, so it's, you know, shooting out one proj that then splits a lot, and you know, you could do whatever you wanted, regular split arrow, tornado shot, rain of arrows. I did try out a bunch of things, and I think the split arrow that the new one actually felt pretty damn good for me, and I stuck to it. But then, yeah, the single target pretty much has to be puncture with snipe, and it did way more than I thought it would. I don't remember exact numbers on it, maybe like 20 million DPS or something. It's a bit awkward, of course. You have to make sure you know the boss fights well enough that you know when to wind up and try and go for your maximum for snipe. But when that does happen and it pays off, it felt real big. So I don't know if we have this is all gear and shit, any actual bossing on this Tube Maven. Yeah, like some pretty big bleeds could happen. And then we're surfboarding, I believe. Which, yep, So that was like one bleed, and that took down an entire Maven phase for Uber Maven. It's just, once again, like I said, you need to know the right time to stand still and do your channels. But that is actually some really good DPS once again. And the gear is nothing insane. It's the Natulas and then some very regular gear, because there's not so much you can do with bleed. Just scale your gear and damage into the infinite. It's just a good solid bow. And then the real unfortunate part of this is I do believe it was adorned scaling. So that's going to be the tough thing to scale if you want to bleed this thick, because adorned, obviously a little bit expensive on the high end, or anything on the usable end. And then getting the jewels themselves is tedious, and you're competing in a market if it's popular enough. So like, you know, the damage over time and the physical damage over time style jewels, but well capable of being put together, and a very thick, strong character in the end. Actually super effective compared to what I would have thought. I think it did everything. I think it cleared everything. I think it took me quite far. Don't know if it did any simulacrum or anything, but I wouldn't expect it to. The enjoyment, pretty damn high. Standing still and channeling, not everyone's favorite. And then the realistic gear, aside from adorned and, you know, maybe a good bow or some shit, which isn't even that hard. Yeah, it's not too bad. I think that one's actually deserving of a realistic enough. So 26. Next character, I'm not entirely sure I can remember, but I think it may have ended up being Builder League. It is the new dual strike of ambidexterity, which just fucked some serious ass. It's just got a highlight reel of a few minutes of destroying every single Uber and taking on all endgame content. And I built it as an occultist strength stack. So I did pretty high amount of memes to try and make this thing, you know, my own and a bit different, and it still resulted in an absolute beast of a build. It is strength stacked with Alberon boots. They were not super expensive in this league, and then all the gear around it depends how expensive you want to go, but could be cheap enough to put together or could be very expensive. And yeah, I think it's the hardest hitting melee I've ever had. Like, the single hits, you know, it could go up to like 10 mil or some shit, maybe even higher. Maybe, I don't remember. But yeah, you can see some of these, like, nothing stood in its path, even juiced mobs and Ubers and everything like that. And this was an occultist, like I said, so if you did, you know, a more normal style build, then potentially it could go bigger. But occultist actually seemed to fit pretty well for this, because it... Damn, that's an Uber Maven, isn't it? Because it has good chaos scaling, and I don't know. That's about it. Good chaos scaling. That's all you need. Probably going to be harder to do without charms, I assume, but I don't think there was anything super enabling of the build for Affliction. And regardless of that, yeah, pretty doable once again in many different ways. The new dual strike is just insane. All you got to do is scale your, you know, main hand a lot, and then hopefully do something really fast with your offhand, and you have a super hard hitting, super fast character that yeah, should be able to be built many different ways. So we're talking, you know, Frost Breath or Strength Stack, Brutus Led Sprinkler, Alberons, fucking Ice Bites. Very versatile skill, should be doable as a starter, should be doable as an end game, should be doable in many different ways. So this character used Paradoxica with a fast offhand. That's where all of our attack speed comes from, because that's how the skill works. It was pretty sleeper OP. I don't think too many people actually played this one throughout the league, or got to, you know, up to this point anyway. But pretty usual strength stack combo, Iron Fortress, Crown of Eyes, Alberons. If you don't go this route, you'd have to do something else. I allowed myself to do like a helical ring with a Calandras and all this sort of stuff. So this is actually a real tough budget one. Like, sure, it's doable again, but it's on the high end, and it's on the high end. Like, I only really did it because of the Affliction League letting me do this stuff. A Calandra ring's like 40 divines, which, you know, is like 5 divines any other league. And one of these is like 80 divines or something. Yeah. And then there were a lot of Eyes of the Great Wolf out there as well. So these were not, this one was only like 1 divine, but most other leagues would probably be tough to get. So effectiveness, it's 10. Enjoyment, that was a 10. Realistic gear, not really. It has to be something like a 23, I think, just because it's going to be hard to get some of this stuff. But as always, it's only as high as you make it for these strength stack builds. If you took away, like, you know, most of the budget, you'd have 2200 strength instead of 2600, and it'd still be a good character. I then tried to tackle the Absolution of Inspiration, which actually got buffed this league, so it's even going to do more damage for some reason, because it ended up being one of the bigger damage characters for the league. It's an Absolution that scales off of minion damage scaling, and I did some pretty weird shit for this one. It's low life. I think it's Ivory Tower, Coruscating Elixir, Inquisitor. It went with you know, Timeless Jewel scaling for extra minion damage, and it did some weird shit. It's a difficult character to conceptualize, not super hard to replicate, I don't think, in the end. And on top of that, it also did Spirit Charge scaling with the Light Poacher, so I did a bunch of Abyssal Jewels as well. So it was a very weird character to put together, but Absolution got buffed, and you could do it in other ways as well. In the end, I basically said that it is what Stormcall wishes it was, because it has a very similar feel, it has a very similar look to it, to Stormcall, but the scaling for this skill is way higher than what Stormcall could ever achieve, and as such, I never really felt lacking on damage on this one, compared to what Stormcall usually feels like. From past memories, yeah, Stormcall usually ends up being a bit, like, underwhelming in its damage, and also does some pretty high retina damage. Similar to this one, I mean, this still is pretty high retina damage, but Stormcall is somehow even worse than that for, yeah, visibility. So yeah, pretty good skill, pretty decent build. I wouldn't really recommend anyone copy it the way I did though, because it was hard to put together and a bit awkward at times as well, with your spirit charges, with your low life, with your coruscating. So it's a very complex situation, but there's huge potential in the new Stormcall, and definitely something you guys could look at and see some other examples of. Wasn't cheap to put together either, I don't think. I put some work into it just to make sure it was going to do things, but nothing too crazy, just some weird stuff to put together. So what was it? Effectiveness, something like a 9, because sometimes, you know, the spirit charges and the low life made things uncomfortable. The enjoyment of it, also kind of a 9. Most of the time pretty fun, most of the time very just clean and interesting way of playing and building a character. And then the realistic gear, yeah, yes and no. Nothing super hard, but kind of hard, and kind of hard to put together in total. So yeah, it's a weird one. It's just, yeah, maybe look into Absolution in the future for some other stuff as well. 23. I then had, once again, another new transfigured gem, this time in the form of Toxic Rain, and it's, I think, the first time I ever really did a good accuracy stacking JUGG. So I've done one before and I wasn't really happy with it. This time around, I think I was a lot happier with this character. It is accuracy stack that gives you lots of lightning damage, that gives you you know, lots of attack speed as well. It's a JUGG that became really thick. So this one was my character. There's examples similar to this that aren't affliction based. Mine was very affliction based. Like, it needed the affliction ascendancies for the tincture and also for the chest slot, like giving you way more armor. It's a JUGG that becomes very thick, you know, not huge amount of life, but with good life gain on hit sustain, I think, as well. Decent poison damage, and decent clear, decent speed, decent everything. It was a pretty well-rounded character. It was very meme-worthy and very worth playing for me in the end. But like I said, if you want to do something similar, I think there are different versions that aren't as affliction-based, and you'll have to check Peewee Ninja for that. Whereas this one, I don't think is actually copyable in any way, shape, or form, because we no longer have the tincture that lets us do poison damage from our lightning. So I think other versions of this type of build don't do poison at all, if I can remember correctly. yeah, all I can say is it was an absolute beast of a character. It was worth playing. It was hard to put together, but it was an example of, once again, some of the wacky shit you can do in PoE and get away with it. So, Toxic Rain JUGG, pretty thick. Used a Widow Hail to do a huge amount of extra damage over time multi, as well as, you know, some other good stuff. Accuracy stack as well. So very weird combo there. You get all of your lightning damage from the boots, and then Brass Dome that gets quadrupled in armor thanks to the Affliction node, Affliction Ascendancy, as well as the JUGG node. Otherwise, yeah, I don't know, pretty okay gear. It's just fairly meticulous to put together because it is accuracy stacking, and that is a kind of solved matter that everyone is going to be looking for the same type of shit. So with that, effectiveness, it was pretty damn high. The enjoyment, I could have used a bit more punch to it, but otherwise still pretty damn high. Realistic gear, it wasn't too bad. But in the future, of course, you will not be replicating this one. Can't do it without the Affliction shit. So that's something like a 25. The next character I didn't even actually make a video on. It's one I was building and putting together just before last Epoch came out, and I thought I'd have more time to do stuff for it. And then in the end, I didn't even think I really wanted to make a video on it, because I didn't particularly love the Doryani's prototype situation or the Lightning Strike situation. It's a level 93 Slayer that ended up going with just big lightning stack and then Doryani's prototype, and I tried to make the new lightning strike of arcing work. So it gives a lot of chains, which is pretty nice and fun for clear. And then I tried to make it do single target through follow through gems. So I had 4 of these, and it was okay. It's a bit uncomfortable and a bit weird that you are, you know, making sure that you have to have your projectiles hit, and, you know, if they're not chaining to anything else. And I was using a tincture or some shit, but basically, yeah, this is what it looks like, right? Lightning strike, and then it chains to a lot of enemies, so it's good for clear. It had okay single target. It didn't do anything insane on single target in the end, because Doryani's prototype requires you to be near things, but then I don't want to be too near things because, like, melee and then projectile and stuff. And on top of that, once again reminded me that Doryani's prototype is a bit uncomfortable. You know, you take damage from some damage over times, some lightning stuff as well. I did try and solve it through what this time around? Just a fuck ton of armor, I believe, because I went with huge amounts of armor scaling, and yeah, with the right auras and buffs and stuff, I think I did have a lot of armor into evasion and stuff like that, and charges. Like, once I was max charged with power charges, frenzy charges, whatever the fuck, endurance, I don't remember. That's where a lot of my armor scaling was coming from, and I was trying to take care of defenses that way, and it didn't seem to feel that good. So this one I didn't actually have a video, but all I can say is Lightning Strike of Arcing does do all right. I'm not sure it's better than the regular one, and yeah, Doryani's prototype, not too sure about that for this type of a setup. So I didn't actually include that anywhere, but I still have to, you know, show you the build and rate it a bit. The effectiveness was clear, really good. Single target felt kind of whatever. Enchantment, a bit whatever. And then realistic gear, it was fairly high on the budget, so nothing too realistic, and that gives us something like an 18. And then we come to my last build of the league, which I made in the last few days of the league. Absolute speed run of a character just to get it, you know, up and running, and then do some challenges. I was at 25 challenges left, and I needed to do 13, and a few of them were pretty high end, so, you know, I had to do some serious clear and speed demoning. I decided to just make another Spectral throw. Good old tried and tested Spectral throw. It is a Dex stack again. I didn't start out thinking I was going to do Dex stack. I thought maybe int stack or maybe just flat damage, because I wanted to use a replica Covenant for the first time, and it ended up being a Dex stack because it just made the most sense. So the claw has cold damage, and then, you know, a bunch of other stuff for cold, and it just turned out to be pretty similar to the last Spectral throw I played that was Dex stack, and it was a highly effective character. Once again, a very enjoyable experience to play Buzzsaw. The playstyle is just smooth, buttery, run around, throw some Spectrals, some come back, some don't, and do extra damage, and it clears nice. It's single targeted fairly nice. If we had an example, I don't remember. I mean, I did a bunch of Ubers on this one. It's still pretty strong with Sniper's Mark. Even after the nerf, it'll still be decent. Yeah, it's just a bit of a visual nightmare with all the spectral throws going out everywhere. So as a matter of fact, with the new Sniper Mark nerf, it'll probably be nicer on the visuals. But yeah, just another spectral throw, nothing too crazy, just another Dex Stack situation. So that is over here. Dex Stack Claw, which is really hard to replicate. Got lucky with that one. Replica Covenant, I wasn't happy with how this thing went in the end, honestly. It's a lot of extra damage, but fixing that energy shield cost was difficult and probably not worth wearing. But then otherwise, regular Dex Stack gear, you know, decent level of budget for that. But once again, the effectiveness did things real well. The enjoyment, loved playing it as always. Took it to 95 while just doing all challenges, and it was smooth. Realistic gear, it's expensive to put together. It's going to be something like a 4. But you can do starters for this. You can do Ice Bite and just like, you know, do a real comfy starter. I've done a Spectral Throw starter into a Dex Stack a few leagues ago in a starter video, I think, that you can reference. But yeah, something like that. I would call it something like a 20 Fissure. And that's that. Yeah, we'll wrap it up there. So, huge league, 17 builds or so. Like I said, played last epoch for like a month, but otherwise I could have done another 5-6 builds in that time. Would have been easy to do. Had a lot of fun, used a lot of new gems, used a lot of new gear, and made a big league of it. Hopefully the next league has some other big things as well. Hopefully I've proven to you throughout the league that melee is still very good. At least the very good melee examples are very good. And they are some of the most fun builds out there. So don't be too scared to get into some of these melees. Just because something else is better, who gives a fuck? As long as it's fun, and some of these melee are hugely fun. Other than that, yeah, hugely fun other builds too. Just a few examples throughout there that maybe can get your brain juices flowing for different ways of building characters. There it is, Affliction, wrapped up. Thank you very much for watching. See you guys next time.